How old is he? Have how
Yeah.
long have you guys been parents? I guess the best way to ask that.
Yeah, so my husband and I have been married for just over 12 years.
Okay.
And we have 3 boys. My oldest is Tyson, and he's almost 11. And then we have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And my oldest son, Tyson, has profound disabilities. So he has cerebral palsy and epilepsy, uses a wheelchair, is predominantly non-speaking, uses a communication device or computer to talk. And he has those disabilities as a result of bacterial meningitis when he was 6 months old that caused a severe traumatic brain injury.
Oh, wow.
At that age.
Wow. And obviously you've had a lot of I guess we'll talk about this more, but advocacy in this space. It's kind of what you do now. And I don't know if that's full time. I heard you're also doing nursing school too.
I am.
So you're
yes.
bouncing a lot. But why don't you just start us off where kind of the beginning? I guess Tyson probably is part of that beginning story of getting involved in what you're doing now, because you're doing a lot. And like I said, I guess I'll welcome you as well. Welcome, Brandi.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming on. But yeah, I've heard little bits and pieces of your story.
Yeah.
And but mostly heard a lot of the cool advocacy and I guess lobbying as well that you found out from ChatGPT, as we were just talking about.
Yes.
Lobbying that you've been doing and on quite a large scale. Sometimes we hear about advocacy just for like a doctor or in a small medical community, but you've been doing it for at the legal level and the law level. So I'm curious to hear more about that story. So I guess just for listeners' sake, why don't you start at the beginning, kind of tell us how you got into that and where your journey begins, I guess the best way to put it.
Yeah, for sure. So my husband and I got married, like I said, about 12 years ago. We were both college students living in eastern Idaho at the time. And just over a year into being married, we had our first child, so Tyson. And I had just graduated school by the time he was born, and my husband had a few years of his bachelor's degree at that point. And we were kind of going along, living in the snow. He was born in the winter. And when he was 6 months old, it was the first time he had ever been sick.
Yeah.
And first-time parents. And, he was throwing up, had the fever, the whole thing for a few days. Took him to the doctor. They said, he just has a cold or flu or something. He'll be fine. And we took him home. The next day, he started having really weird symptoms. I now know that those are abnormal neurological symptoms where he stopped the ability to suck and swallow. He was holding his head to the side really weird. Instead of crying, he was like moaning. The color was going out of his face. And so at that point, he had been sick 3 or 4 days at that point.
Yeah.
We both called our moms because we were 24 and, first kid.
Right.
And they were like, that's not normal. You should take him to the hospital. So we take him to this little rural hospital. And at the time, I had very little medical experience. And they were kind of in there trying to get IVs on him. He was getting more agitated. Looking back on it, I now know his vital signs were way off the charts. It's not normal to have doctors and nurses constantly in the room.
Right.
That type of thing. And at one point, we had been there a few hours, and the nurse came in and said, we want to do a spinal tap to rule out meningitis. Yeah. And we were like, okay. I didn't even know what that was really. They had us leave the room. We got some sandwiches, came back, and they were like, he's getting worse. We're going to transfer you to the bigger hospital that was about an hour away.
Sure.
And so they called a specialty ambulance team, and we went lights and sirens down to this other hospital. It took us about 45 minutes to get there. During that time, he was de-escalating. He was getting worse. He started throwing up blood. It just was really gruesome. And we get down to that other hospital. In the meantime, I had called both of our moms and was crying and freaking out and, all the things. And we get down to that hospital, and there's 2 doctors in the trauma unit. There's multiple nurses trying to get IV lines in him. They go do a CT scan. During that time, the other hospital calls and tells us he has bacterial meningitis. And I'm super grateful that they performed that test at that first hospital, because by the time we got to the second, his body was so rigid. He looked from head to toe like a like a crescent shape.
Oh, wow.
Just because of how the meningitis kind of spreads and affects
Yeah.
their body.
What is bacterial meningitis?
Yeah. So it's an infection of the meninges of the brain,
Okay.
which it's if effectively it is an infection that can penetrate the entire brain, cause damage in some individuals, and that cerebral spinal fluid. And then it, in some individuals, about 50%, there's no lasting effects. In
Sure.
about 50%, you have mild to severe to potential death from that infection. So it's something that they vaccinate for. It's particularly dangerous, can spread easily, on college campuses,
Sure.
things of that nature. Also, really young babies are more susceptible because their immune systems are more compromised.
Sure.
So in his particular case, he had a form that was non-contagious, but it was a strep bacteria that had penetrated that blood-brain barrier, and we believe because he had a cold or something of that nature for the 3 or 4 days before that strep bacteria was able to get in and infect really rampantly because of that.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And what was that like? Because I know you mentioned, this is your first kid. You're living away from home.
Yeah.
It sounds like kind of a smaller rural area if you had to transfer hospitals. What was that like? Because I know, especially as I'm not a first-time parent or anything like that, but
Yeah.
It's all new, right? And first kid's new, like everything about it. So what was that like? What was that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was extremely terrifying, to say
Yeah.
the least. My husband was currently getting a bachelor's degree to be a paramedic. So he was in a few beginning medical courses, but by and large, we didn't have any experience in this area. And yeah, it was terrifying. I remember that night they did the CT scan. They took us up to the pediatric ICU, which had like 4 or 5 beds. And he was the only child in that unit at the time. So I just remember walking by the room after they brought him up after the CT. It was probably 12 in the morning, 1 a.m. And the nurses were cleaning him up. He had put himself into a self-induced coma at that point. His vitals were just off the charts. And we sat down with the ICU doctor. He kind of explained that statistic of 50% of, people who get this won't have any long-term effects. 50% will have some level of effect. And there's a certain percentage that don't make it through.
Right.
And he basically said, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think we are in a safe place right now. But if that changes, he starts de-escalating even more, I will be frank and upfront with you.
Wow.
And so we went from that morning to having a sick baby, to weird symptoms, to taking him to the hospital, transfer, and then we were in a critical ICU state
Wow.
by midnight.
What was that like, timeline wise? What was that? Within a day, a couple days, or
That was like 12 hours.
12 hours? Holy cow!
Yeah.
Wow. Man.
It was wild.
So at this point, so he's in a coma. Did what kind of transpired after that?
Yeah, so he ended up being in the hospital for about 6 or 7 weeks. About 4 or 5 days in, we knew that the brain damage was pretty severe at that point. We could see better with MRIs. We decided to life flight him down to Salt Lake City, where there was a bigger children's hospital.
Yeah.
And more specialists. And so, anyway, so that was a whole experience. And prior to that, the one story I wanted to share that speaks to the advocacy is particularly the next morning after we had been there. My husband and I had slept on a little bed that was probably about, this wide together with alarms going off all night. And I remember waking up the next morning and I was like, I don't even feel cold or warm. Like I was just in such shock that my senses were off and, all the things.
Sure.
But that next morning we were standing in a circle, or what they call rounds, with the medical team.
Yeah.
And discussing his case, and what they would be doing that day and that sort of thing. And I remember the ICU doctor, the same one we had spoken to the few hours before that,
Yeah.
he looked at my husband and I, and he said, your voices matter just as much here as anyone else in this circle.
Yeah.
And you know your son best. And this is talking to 24-year-old parents with a 6-month-old baby who had never been sick before.
Right.
But he gave us the courage and the autonomy to say, okay, we have valuable input that we can provide in this circumstance. We can ask questions. We have the ability to advocate for our son.
Right.
And that really set me up to be a strong advocate for him in medical settings, in school settings, with state services, in all different types of areas of his life. Was very encouraging. I didn't realize how critical that little piece would be as far as my journey and my story and Tyson's story.
Sure.
But it really did make a big difference. So anyway, the next kind of 6-8 weeks we spent in the hospital. He ended up getting a feeding tube, and he had some recovery. He had, regression. It was kind of like taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Right.
My opinion, we were discharged way too early. They sent us home back to eastern Idaho. It was over 5 hours away from that hospital.
Right.
And he still had to get IV medication every single day.
Oh, wow.
He was not tolerating the food that he was getting. He was trying to throw up every 10 or 15 minutes.
Wow.
Anyway.
Why did they send you back home? So if he was at that kind of juncture.
Yeah. I think partially we were like, yeah, we're ready to go home.
Oh,
because I was like, I can do this. I'm an overachiever, if you couldn't tell. And, ultimately ended up being we had 3 adults. So one of our moms was with us throughout the entire hospital stay.
Right.
They kind of rotated who was supporting us. And then my husband and myself, we had 3 adults trying to take care of this little very sick child still round the clock.
Sure.
Getting medications every 2 or 3 hours, not tolerating stuff. Anyway, and 3 adults couldn't manage that care. And so I wish they had discharged us to like a rehab facility or something of that nature.
Right.
Versus, discharging us directly home.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a piece I understand a little bit better now, but
yeah.
was a difficult part of that story.
Yeah. When so once you got back home, because I think a lot of parents have kids with a disability or special needs or whatever their circumstance may be.
Yeah.
But taking care of someone who has a disability or a special circumstance, that takes a lot. Like you said, at this point in his journey, it was 3 adults trying to manage to take care of him day in and day out and full time. But what was that like? Because you mentioned advocacy-wise, learning how to advocate at the school level. What's that like? Because I think for people who don't necessarily have a child or sometimes even it's an adult who has special needs or a special circumstance, they don't know what that's like at all. So could you give us a little insight into what that looks like?
Yeah. So I would say that first, 6 months post-diagnosis was really a grieving period for myself, my husband, and our extended families. He was the first grandchild on both of our sides, and we all went through our own grief of who he would have been despite this, unknown disability.
Sure.
And he came home from the hospital basically pre-birth development, didn't have the ability to track with his eyes, he couldn't sit up, hold his head.
Yeah.
Basically what a development would be in utero versus even when they're born.
Right.
And so we definitely grieved. It really woke my husband and I up to, we needed to both get into therapy individually. We needed to, get life insurance.
Yeah.
That was another thing. We realized the fragility of life, and that if something had happened to us instead, what that would have financially put the other person through.
Right.
That was a big wake-up call. And I remember one day, a few months after being home, I had made a list of all the phone calls and appointments and things I had to make, and it literally filled every single line of like a huge notepad.
Yeah.
To order supplies, to make appointments, to schedule therapies, to talk to the early intervention specialists, medical appointments, all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is my life. I'm just I'm a care coordinator. Like,
Right.
I'm operating in this role of, service navigation. We were trying to apply for Social Security for him. We were, thankfully he was on Medicaid due to our low income with being in college at that point.
Sure.
But we were then switching to like disability Medicaid, which is a different area than low income Medicaid. Anyway, so it's just a lot to navigate systems and learn medical jargon, to be able to have, comprehensive conversations with the medical teams. He probably had 12 different specialists at that point.
Wow.
And we were traveling down to Salt Lake for all of those.
Yeah. So the drive to boot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was just a lot of, care coordination. And then I was like, what is my mom look? How do I be a mom to him?
Right.
How do I still show up in my marriage? How do I, all of these different pieces, right? And I just was expecting to have a child and just be mom.
Right.
Instead of a therapist, a nurse, a doctor, a care coordinator, all the different roles I was then playing.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a huge adjustment. But people who have individuals in their families with disabilities, sometimes it's a sibling, a grandparent, parent, often fill many different roles in that individual's life.
Definitely. Wow. So looking back, now that you've been doing this for 12 plus years, what worked for you? How did you manage all those roles? Because obviously I think you see circumstances sometimes that cripple people and it becomes detrimental, and sometimes people who take a hard, tough experience and they make the best of it and they work together to make it happen. Not that there's not struggles throughout all of it.
Right.
But looking back now, what worked? How did you, be that mother, caregiver, therapist, all those things? How did you manage it, and how's that worked? What's that been like?
Yeah, it's looked different over the years. I've had very low points, very high points, so I don't think that's either a one or the other journey. I think you kind of bounce between the two.
Yeah.
But therapy has definitely been a huge support for me. I've done different bouts of it over the years, specifically trauma specific therapy like EMDR, somatic therapy, things of that nature that really target the really traumatic experiences that we've had with my son and in other areas of my life that have really helped me to grow beyond kind of those struggles.
Yeah.
The other aspect that I think has really supported me is having outside caregivers. And one thing that is not often discussed is every single state in the United States has different programs and different services that they offer. And we have moved with Tyson and navigated services in 3 states now. So we lived in Idaho at the time. We moved to Oklahoma for a few years, and then we have lived in Arizona for about 7 years now.
Sure.
And what I can tell you is it's very much like moving to a foreign country every single time.
Are they all different in some
They're
way
all
and
very
aspects?
different, and you have to apply for all of the programs in every state you move in, so nothing carries over.
Oh, okay.
And so
That's annoying.
yeah. And, a lot of that kind of comes into like why I've been really passionate about policy and legislative changes and things of that nature. But one thing I learned really early on was having outside supports come into my home. And depending on the state you live in, you can have, nursing supports, attendant care, other providers that come in and support the individual with disabilities.
Sure.
Often that can be inconsistent. Sometimes you're hiring family to fulfill those roles. But for me personally, I do much better when I have, somebody in my home at least 30 to 40 hours a week helping me with his care.
Absolutely.
So, and that comes with, the double-edged sword of someone else is always in your house, right?
Yeah.
So it's a balance between, okay, I need support. I want the mental capacity for myself to be able to sit down with my kid and read him a book while somebody else does all the feeding tubes and the medications and the, interventions so that I can have a few minutes to just be mom.
Right.
And so it's a balance, and I've gone through periods where I'm like, okay, everybody out. I need a break for like 3 months.
Yeah.
But by and large, that's been one of my huge recommendations to people is to get that level of support.
Is there, just because you've moved from these different states and had different levels of caregiving, and what would you say some of the drastic differences are between the three states you were in? Just give us an idea.
Yeah. Some of the biggest aspects that are different state to state is the DDD or developmental disability departments or programs.
Yeah.
For example, when we lived in Oklahoma, our son still qualified for Social Security. He was paying the rent at the time, which we really appreciated in our, young life.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to exceed the income limit for that Social Security income, because if we did that, we knew we would have a 4 to 6 month wait to get on to a Medicaid waiver. And I was terrified to go 4 to 6 months without insurance for him.
Right.
And because he had multiple ICU stays, he has multiple hospital stays, which exceed in the millions of dollars.
Right.
And so to me, I was like, well, we're going to make $1,000 less a month and stay on this until we figure out where's a good place for us to land and navigate these systems, right?
Totally. Yeah.
I don't even know what your question was. You might have to tell me again.
Oh, just some of the drastic differences between each state and, and what that entailed.
Yeah. One of the stark differences was, for example, Tyson has qualified for nursing in all 3 states.
Okay.
In Idaho, it was a couple hours a week. In Oklahoma, it was 0 because we didn't qualify for their developmental disability because it had a 10-year wait list.
Oh, wow.
So he didn't get any nursing in Oklahoma. He got 6 hours of respite every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And that was only because he qualified for Social Security.
Oh, okay.
And then we moved to Arizona, and he qualified for over 40 hours a week of nursing care.
Oh, wow.
So you take the child with the same diagnosis, same level of need throughout, a few short years, but the services that are available to that individual are vastly different depending on what state you live in.
Jeez. Why do you think it's so different in each state? Is it just how each state runs their local government? Is it how the policy was originally enacted? Is it,
so a waiver program, a Medicaid waiver program, in short, is a federal agreement with each state, and they can decide which type of waivers they want to do. So over the last 4 or 5 decades, we've moved from institutionalizing individuals with disabilities to providing them supports in their homes and communities. And that transition has occurred with a lot of federal legislation and a lot of state legislation. And ultimately what kind of happened is every state says, okay, these are the services we want to provide. This is how many people we're going to provide it to. These are our budgets. And then there's federal matching dollars to those state programs. So essentially every state legislature can decide what those look like.
Right.
And then receive the appropriate matching federal money that goes along with those.
Interesting. So how do they determine the number of people they're going to service? Is it based on population size? Is it based off of how many they've been servicing currently? Because
that's a great question.
It sounds like in Oklahoma, they didn't have enough servicing dollars if they had such a long waiting list of up to 10 years. So how's it even decided? Yeah,
my understanding is that is a legislature decision based on how much they want to allot to that section of the budget.
Okay.
So 2 other examples, I would personally never live in Utah or Texas because they have very long wait lists
for
these same programs, over 10 years. And whereas in Arizona has a state waiver that doesn't allow for wait lists.
Oh, okay.
And so it just depends on I think there's 12 or 15 different waiver programs for this type of population. And the states can choose which types of programs they engage with. And so then it's kind of, okay, what are the rules around that? And how much money is the legislature going to allot to those programs?
Interesting. Huh. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So it just kind of depends on where you live and what the state policy is and how they've decided to.
Yep.
Interesting. So who you have in there making the policies can make a big difference too, I would assume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference.
Interesting. I wonder. That's curious about Arizona. Why that one is different than maybe Utah or some of these others, or Texas, for
Yeah.
example.
Arizona in particular, in the late 80s, I believe, so around the same time like the ADA was passed,
Yeah.
they developed what they call the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System, or what we call as Access in Arizona, which
Yeah.
is the umbrella term for Medicaid
Yeah.
in Arizona. And they basically developed a very unique program structure for Medicaid compared to a lot of other states. And they have been one of the leading states in disability services for over a decade, and have been able to have some cost containment around that, that other states look at and see, oh, okay, how could we implement some of these things in our state to make it a good service that's actually delivered and then also cost effective.
Right. You got to imagine if you're living in a state that doesn't institute it well, it's kind of like, don't want to.
It's hard.
Yeah. Don't. Yeah. Exactly. It would be hard to be there if it wasn't really implemented well.
Yeah.
So, obviously, you had kind of being the caretaker and learn all these different positions and roles, and now you mentioned that story with the doctor, and I know on that questionnaire you mentioned that comment he made early on. While you maybe didn't know in the moment how impactful it would have been,
Yeah.
it's made a big difference from being kind of one voice for your son to being involved in a lot of policy making.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, because that's kind of a little bit of how I got to know about you, was the policy making and hearing about what you've done there. Tell me about that experience, how you got involved in that, because I would assume I don't think a lot of people find themselves stumbling into that.
Right.
So tell me a little about your experience in policy making.
Yeah. So it kind of started, I was, functioning as the multiple different roles for Tyson as his advocate, within education, state services, medical settings.
Yeah.
And I had gained a lot of, communication skills of how to have conversations, how to navigate systems, how to understand how decisions are made in those spheres. And we ultimately, in 2020, COVID happened, the world shut down, all those things. And one of the programs that came out of that was a temporary allowance for parents of minor children to be paid and trained as caregivers for their children with disabilities. And this was due to, workforce issues due to COVID and things of that nature. And I personally was like, oh, this is amazing. This is solving, workforce issues that we were having for many years before that.
Yeah.
And that I had a bachelor's degree, but I was, caring for my son because our supports were inconsistent and just due to the inavailability of providers.
Sure.
And so I started asking questions. I started having a meeting with people that I knew that worked in advocacy in our state and said, can this be changed through policy? Do we need legislation to change this? How does this work? And I got a lot of no's, I don't knows, go talk to this person.
Yeah.
And ultimately, 15, 20 conversations later, I was sitting in meetings with the leader of Access or Arizona Medicaid and, the different deputy directors, things of that nature, and asking them questions. And I came to them with ideas and recommendations and questions. And even though I was shut down multiple times in the beginning, I would come back and I would say, hey, I did more research and I learned this. What do you have to say about that?
Right.
Can we make this permanent with that? And ultimately we ended up getting, in 2021, we got a program extension. And then in 2023, Access decided to change the state waiver and add the Parents as Paid Caregivers program to our state as a permanent service delivery model. And then in 2025, we went through the legislative cycle where we did a lot of educating of our legislators who didn't understand the program,
Right.
were confused on how it was added, if it was legal, if it was not, and really just sharing our stories, sharing why this program was so important, and that it was critical for our minor children to actually receive the services that they were assessed for, and that this was allowing that to take place. And so through all those different experiences, I've learned a lot about, policy changing and things of that nature in Arizona, how CMS or federal Medicaid intersects with that, and then also learning and building relationships with legislators on both sides of the aisle. We ultimately, in April, we had two issues. We had gap funding that was needed for the DDD department in Arizona. We needed 2 months worth of funding because they were short on that budget. And then we needed, the legislature wanted reforms around this Parents as Paid Caregivers program. And in that process, we were able to negotiate, have stakeholder meetings, and create a bipartisan solution where there was, this program would be permanent through legislation. There were new guardrails around it, and we had that gap funding that was needed.
Wow.
And so ultimately that came as a result of thousands of people sharing their stories, following our coalition's call to actions, engaging with their legislators, and really having it known why these programs and policies are more important than the politics and the political games that were attempted to be played with this population.
Totally. Let me turn this camera back on and then
Yeah.
more questions on that.
I'm gonna scratch my head if that's okay.
Oh yeah, totally. Make sure that's running too. Okay, we're good.
Cool.
Okay, so my question on that was, with all the legislation, were you surprised actually? Were you surprised with how little policymakers or legislatures or people who were working those positions knew about the topic you were coming and bringing to them, or were they pretty well versed in it?
I don't think I was shocked. I think legislators by nature have to be proficient on a lot of issues.
Right.
They don't get to, unless they have personal experience, be an expert on any given topic or, section of the government.
Right. Right.
So if you have a former teacher who's in the legislature, they might know more about education. If you have someone has a loved one with a disability, they might know a little bit more in that area. But we did a lot of educating of, how these programs serve our families, how these dollars actually save dollars because it's preventing institutionalization.
Right.
It's preventing long-term cost and crisis care for individuals with disabilities. And I was able to conduct 2 surveys, one in 2023 and one in 2025, that really showed that, when these programs that stabilize families and the kids are able to receive the consistent care, it reduces, housing instability. It helps people get off of, state services. It reduces the caregiver stress levels. It reduces abuse rates. It improves health outcomes for the members with disabilities. And so all of these different benefits are associated with them providing the funds that actually pay for the services that are set on paper that are needed.
Right.
So that was, a huge education piece and hurdle that we had to overcome, but I'm super glad that we did, and we actually got a bipartisan solution.
Wow.
We had Representative Gutierrez, Representative Willoughby, so one Democrat, one Republican in our state legislature, and they were able to come to the table and hash out, what is this bill going to look like? What can we all get on board with? I think ultimately nobody was fully happy, ourselves included, but it was a good compromise that we could all live with.
What was the compromise they came to?
So ultimately, initially, Democrats wanted clean supplemental and the program continued, and Republicans, depending on which one you talked to, wanted, services for DDD to be cut and the program for Parents as Paid Caregivers to go away.
Interesting.
And so ultimately we kind of came to this middle ground of, we're going to have reforms on the program, and we're also going to, add the gap funding that was needed so that individuals with disabilities aren't displaced and they're cared for in that, 2-month gap between when the funding ran out and the new budget year. And anyway, it was just a really beautiful solution of when we put the individuals who are receiving the services, whether it's a, DCS kiddo, whether it's, individuals who have disabilities or, students in the education system, when we put those as the priority, we can really come together and have solutions versus kind of political gamesmanship.
Totally. Yeah, well, and that's what it's supposed to be about, right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be about serving the individual, but yeah, it gets lost in the mix along the way, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah.
What would be the reasoning? Because that's interesting to hear in working with both parties, Republicans and Democrats. What would be the? Because I have some questions even now where they've started to do some budget cuts on. I think it was on was it DDDs, that department.
So they suggested it, but they ended up not.
They ended up not.
Yeah.
Okay. I was curious, what's the reasoning behind being for those cuts and removing the program? What was some of their reasoning?
I think the primary reason was the cost. DDD in general, disability services in general, generally have an upwards trajectory year over year, depending on how many people are in the program. Cost of care goes up, things of that nature, right? And so the price tag continued to get really high, and they wanted to decrease that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the result of that, I knew from living firsthand experience that it would cost more for the state long term
Sure.
if they made temporary cuts now, versus let's have smart, innovative solutions to see how we can improve costs, improve programs, improve services, and let's have that conversation versus making universal cuts across the board.
Right. What's one of those? What were one of the areas that would have been an innovative solution, just for an example, versus kind of the long-term pile-up that would long-term or in the long run cost more? What was?
Yeah, so one thing that we discussed and ended up in the legislation was redoing the needs assessment tool, and that was something that I was aware of was in the works and that could be improved to ensure that the hours that are being provided are needed by the members and that they're being assessed fairly across the board.
Sure.
And so from living that firsthand, I said, okay, this is something that we can improve on in our state and make sure that we're, truly assessing the real need for each individual member, which is, the primary goal of the departments. So that was something that, we brought to the table, and we're like, this is a reasonable thing that we could put in and guardrail on the program.
Interesting. Okay. So just a better usage of funds and really identifying the needs of each individual a little bit better.
Yeah, and it's, when you kind of look at it from a high perspective, you're like, oh, well, I'll just get legislation change and then, everything will be fixed, right? That's
right.
The kind of thought process.
Sure.
Whether you're talking federal or state. But every single piece of legislation, every single piece of policy has implications, and it's open to interpretation, right? That's why we have the court systems as well. And so what I've seen is, we pass legislation, it then gets interpreted into policy, and then it gets implemented by state employees, and then the individuals who actually receive the services are then impacted by all of those levels of change, right?
Right.
And so it's been interesting to see, the effect of all of those different pieces.
Sure.
And we're continuing to still advocate and be in the policy change space and, talk with, policymakers in our state to make sure that what was intended up here is actually what is being delivered at the front lines.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes the boots on the ground it's not nearly the same up at the top, right? Not sure.
Yeah.
The water's making it to the end of the road. For the most part, have you seen it be fairly positive, the changes that have been implemented so far?
I would say so. We're currently in this last week, they updated some policies. Our community has some different opinions on those and are working on, creating change. We have some action items that we've created over the weekend. Several thousands of individuals are concerned about these implications of these policy changes. We were able to collect over 1,000 survey responses in under 36 hours. And so our coalition, this grassroots movement, has really become a powerful force of, if you have 5 minutes or you have multiple hours to dedicate to advocacy on a broader scale, our coalition will provide you avenues to engage. And so if you can just send one email, that's fabulous.
Right.
If you can share your story over here, that's great. If you can go talk to a legislator, let me tell you how to do that.
Sure.
And so we want to be able to be that bridge for people to feel empowered to engage, whether that's, for their own child, whether it's personally or on a grand statewide national level. Because that empowerment and feeling like you have a voice when you are constantly in crisis or you're dealing with, all these really difficult things of, maybe your child's on palliative care, maybe, your child's not tolerating school very well, they have a lot of behaviors. There are going to be a lot of realms of hard within disability.
Sure.
But being able to share your voice, have a voice in some sector is really empowering to a lot of individuals. And so that's what we try to create with our coalition.
Right. Well, that's probably so huge too, because I would assume there's a lot of people who don't feel like they have a voice at the table, or they're kind of helpless to get what they want or they need in their circumstances. So on these kind of recent changes that you said, kind of reaching out to the coalition, asking about, what are those changes that are being made? Are they positive? Are they negative? Or what's kind of if you don't mind me asking?
No, it's good. So for reference, last week, the state access department and DDD came out with updated policy, surrounding all of the new regulation that came out this spring.
Yeah.
It went through a public comment period earlier in May and June of this year. And we participated in that with call to actions and sharing how people can engage and share their opinions on those policies. And then this last week, have received the final versions of those policies. And one of my concerns is kind of a double-edged sword, is we've had systematic issues for multiple years of inadequate implementation of hours. And then we've also, on the same side, I might start that over, sorry.
No, you're good.
So the double-edged sword of the policy change is that we've had, for multiple years, some inconsistencies in how hours are evaluated.
Okay.
So we've been asking for that to be
care
changed.
Workers or parents? Or both, maybe?
State employees who evaluate the care.
I see, okay, yeah.
So there's a lot of level of bureaucracy in all of this.
Sure.
And then on the other side, the states are mandated to provide individualized assessments for members to make sure that they are receiving the care that they need and that it's personalized so that their individual needs are met.
I see.
And so I feel like we've kind of swung from one extreme to the other, and you need to figure out somewhere in the middle to land. And the policies that came out last week have some really rigid limitations that I think will be harmful to individuals with disabilities, especially children.
Sure.
And so, right now I'm in the middle of, finalizing the data I collected, putting together some reports, writing a letter, issuing a press release, all the kind of things that you do, as well as my public calls to action, where thousands of people are engaging and sending emails and sharing their stories.
Yeah.
And so it's in combination of, leading a movement, making, my position, working with our coalition members to finalize what our position is, and then taking that out and allowing the grassroots community to also provide energy around our position.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's probably got to be a huge factor, is when you're not only getting feedback from the community saying, hey, here's concerns we have, this is how it might impact this one group, or this might impact me a different way.
Yeah.
But then also, depending on what maybe the data shares, having voices behind that, or like, wait, we've got a large group who want this. I'm sure that helps sway opinion and decision, I guess, was probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, it definitely drives change.
Sure.
And whether that's in, legislation, whether that's working with, to change policy in your state, that mass amount of voices sharing similar messages is extremely powerful. And I think a lot of organizations around the country try to create grassroots movements, right? They try to put together a community and make change. And, whether that is artificial, hyped with media, depending on what that looks like, it can come across very differently. What we've done with our coalition and what makes us unique is that individuals with disabilities come from all sectors of life, all socioeconomic statuses,
Totally.
all races, genders, all those types of things. And we've been able to bring people together with all this different background and experience and say, hey, this is our position, this is what we're doing. You're welcome to have your own position. I don't ever say that everyone has to agree with me by any means. But if you want your voice to be heard, this is, how you reach out to your legislator. This is how you can share your story with people in state departments. And empowering people to do that has been really encouraging to me to see the democratic process actually be in effect and have it be policy and legislation that is by the people for the people.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, totally, it does. I think that's we don't necessarily see that in action as much as I think we as people would like to see.
Right.
Right. We hear about it, but there's so much media, there's so much information out there where we see, kind of that, the state play at work, right? As you mentioned.
It's the games.
Yeah, the games where you're going, is my voice even being heard? Does my vote even matter? Does anything I say really make a difference?
Right.
And so, being able to see it firsthand, I bet that is really a neat experience. And I'm sure it's neat for people who are involved who see that, okay, this is making a change.
For sure. Well, and it's been really empowering to demand more of our elected officials.
Right.
Because I was told, multiple times this last spring and legislative cycle that, you're asking way too much for this. You're setting the bar really high for these people to come together and work together, right? But ultimately, our ask was, we need a solution, and you guys are going to have to get past your differences, and we need a bipartisan solution because we have a bipartisan government in our state. And ultimately, that's what we received, and that is very rare occurrence in very rare occurrence in our current political climate.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
Full, that's not good. All right.
Sorry, I'm going to make sure nobody's on fire.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. Sorry.
So in the kind of the lawmaking process of this, because you mentioned how it's a two-party system, right? And a lot of times it should be these bipartisan issues where it's more about the people and not so much about the games and the policy making. Did you find that in working and now, because you're still working in it, do you find that most of the time people are sympathetic to it, and when you talk to them, both sides care, or do you find that, but unfortunately, whether it's because they have to push one thing for a different group, or they're tied to another group that maybe supported them, that's what gets in the mix? Or is it like, I have my rigid opinion, my view, and I don't care about the individual?
Probably both. I mean, it depends on who you're speaking to, because I think when people vote, they should look at the individual they're voting for versus the political party
Right.
that person's in, right? Which is really hard to do because you're like, I just looked at their website and which one do I choose?
Right.
Most of us are not deeply involved or have relationships with the people we elect, right?
Right.
But, listening to interviews they do, listen to things they voted for, read their voting record, and see if it's things that you align with. I think is a crucial thing as a voter that you can do to ensure that you're doing a little bit more research and engaging as far as knowing who you're electing. Because I do believe there's good people on both sides, and that's
Totally.
not a popular opinion. And I also think there's people that are harmful to the systems on both sides as well. And that's ultimately what we, the people, can dictate is who we elect, right? We can influence that. We can go out. We can take political action. We can make noise, all that type of stuff. And then once those individuals are elected, whether they're in your party or not, or even if you don't align with the party, you can say, hey, I'm going to go in their office. I have an idea. I want to see something change, and I'm going to go have a 15-minute meeting with my legislator. And I'm going to have a conversation. I don't care what political party they are. I don't care what political party I am, and see what they are willing to do for me. And then, engaging in that conversation, building that relationship, that rapport, really helps you to actually create that change. It does help when you have, thousands of people
Sure.
backing you as well. But those conversations are critical, and I think most people do care, and they want to understand why things are so important, and they have a million things coming at them from all angles all the time.
Right.
But ultimately, those legislators are elected to represent us, and we can hold them to that standard.
Definitely. No, I think people don't think they can, and obviously you've experienced that where they said, you're asking too much, but really they work for, the people that they represent. And so
Yep.
What was that like trying to get a meeting with, I would assume you probably went with your local legislatures first.
Yeah.
Was it difficult? Was it easy? I'm sure there was a lot of following up that had to take place. What was that like?
Yeah, so before this year, I had taken, a couple of, advocacy classes on how to talk to legislators.
Yeah.
I didn't have personal experience prior to this year. And so I knew, okay, I need to walk in, I need to tell my story, I need it to be impactful, and I need to ask, right? That's
Right.
basically what I knew. And I started showing up at the Capitol. I started sending emails asking for meetings. One of my legislators, I happened to look at a picture of him. I walked in the building to attend a committee meeting, and he walked by me, and I was like, hey, I've been trying to get a hold of you. And he's like, hey, here's my cell phone number. Let's get in
wow.
touch. So, I think they are more accessible than we might think, but
yeah.
it's kind of about being the squeaky wheel, right?
Right.
So it's like, okay, I sent emails, I'm making phone calls, I'm maybe down there in person, I'm paying attention to what's happening. I also want to know, what do they care about? What's their background? So that I can have a conversation and really build that rapport with them individually.
Right.
And form that relationship and continue from that point.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's really got to be, I guess it's like a lot of things. You got to be, diligent on it and
For sure.
show that you mean it. They probably get a lot of people trying to get at their attention. And so if, you just send one email, you're probably not going to get
Right.
very much attention. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Is this something you've, the coalition, because obviously we've got your website up on the screen,
Yeah.
which it looks great, by the way.
Thank you.
Is this something, now that it's an official nonprofit and you guys have some memberships, you guys do trainings, is this just Arizona? Is this U.S. wide? Because I know you've done some stuff, even you've gone to Washington, D.C. as well, and
Yeah.
I'm curious a little bit about that experience. How far wide is what you're working on?
Yeah, so right now it's predominantly Arizona. We just launched our memberships, honestly, in the last week. We've been working for several months to get this going.
Oh, wow.
And within the first week, we have, I think, 5 or 6 provider agencies that have signed up. And those are companies that provide direct care to individuals with disabilities. So they hire the people that come into the
Okay.
homes.
Yeah.
And then we have between 1 and 200 individual memberships. And I think that launch went really well, particularly because we've built such a strong rapport with our community in them respecting and understanding what we're about and wanting to support that effort.
Absolutely.
And with, those coalition dollars, up to what we've done until last week, we've completed with zero money, which is extremely rare in the,
Yeah.
Policy space,
Totally.
lobbying space, with, stories and grassroots and perseverance.
Yeah.
And I think if there's one thing to learn from caregivers or individuals with disabilities is we know how to hear no, and we know how to come back from that.
Sure.
And we know how to ask better questions and to resolve grievances and to get those decisions overturned
Right.
if it's in the best interest of our loved one. And so I think that perseverance is kind of unique to that community.
Definitely.
But it's what makes a really strong coalition.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, because, I've had a few guests on where they've had, a family member who they're taking care of.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a common trait. It's, they're used to getting told no or having to advocate for that loved one and keep on pushing and persevering even when things aren't going their way. So that's a good point. 'Cause that is, to do what you guys have been doing and do what you've done. Have you been kind of solo on this for a while, or was it you at first, then you gained a few people as you kept going, or what's that like?
Yeah, so we've had different people. It started the first few years with myself and one of my friends. We met on a Facebook group and, co-founded the coalition. Yeah. And within the last year, we've said, okay, this is something that needs to be permanent. It needs to be, we need some funding to be able to maintain it and to make it sustainable for myself and the other people working day in, day out on these efforts. And so we now have a board that works with us, so about 6 people in our leadership team at this point. And I'm sure over time we'll, get a secretary. I'm super excited for that day. Admin assistant. And, it'll just continue to grow from there, having other lobbyists, having other people. But we have an amazing community that have volunteered their time and their energy, their expertise to this effort. And one thing that's really neat is, again, because disability doesn't discriminate between anybody in any setting of life.
Right.
We have people with, a lot of business background, a lot of nonprofit background, a lot of, different things that bring a lot of wide experience to the table so that we can take that knowledge and use that as we're advocating for these specific issues.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, because it's widespread, right? You're helping everyone. It's not specific to one group or another. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think something with disability is if you're not impacted by it right now in your life, you probably will be at some point.
Sure.
Right? So if you don't have a loved one at the moment, maybe when you're aging, you'll become disabled.
Right.
Or if you have an accident or a loved one has an accident, they could become instantly disabled the next day. And so disability issues are a society issue that everyone should care about. Because it will impact you at some point in your life, whether you know it or not. And having those social programs, those systems in place to ensure that we're caring for our most vulnerable in a loving and humane way is going to better us as a people versus, being like, we'll fund it next year,
right.
kind of a thing. So it's, I look at it as, let's talk to those stakeholders that really understand how these work. Let's improve them, let's make them cost effective, and let's ensure that we're being the kindest and most humane society that loves and cares for these individuals in their homes and communities.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard it put that way, but it's true. I guess at some level you'll be affected by this issue one way or another, or people who have, disabilities, whether it's a family member, because I don't think a lot of people think of your grandpa who can't walk anymore, or your grandma who's got dementia, but it's true. That's equally as impactful.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. I never thought of that. What was your experience like in Washington, D.C., kind of getting that experience? That's probably pretty cool.
It was really neat.
Kind of walk me through that.
Yeah, so I was invited by, oh my gosh. We're going to have to pause. I have to look up the name.
No, you're good.
Because that's going to be embarrassing. It's something workers. Domestic workers. Okay, sorry.
No, you're good.
So I was invited out to Washington, D.C. by the Domestic Workers Alliance. And they were bringing different coalitions from different key states regarding the big, beautiful bill that was being voted on in Washington this past spring, summer.
Yeah.
And we were speaking with our elected officials. And they set up the meetings, and they had staffers that had worked in Washington and were able to kind of show us around how things worked. And it was fascinating to watch, members of Congress kind of come and go from their offices and their committee meetings and all this kind of stuff. While I was there, I was only there for like 48 hours. I ended up attending a midnight protest on the steps of the Capitol because they were in a committee meeting at 1 a.m. voting on the big beautiful bill in the House. And we were outside protesting and, raising awareness, getting our sound bites, our sound clips.
Yeah.
It was raining. I'm from Arizona. I was very cold. I did not bring a right jacket for that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Was the big beautiful bill, was it, I'm assuming because you were there protesting, it was probably not positive for the big beautiful bill. How was that impacting, disability? How was that impacting that?
Yeah, so the big beautiful bill had a lot of implications for healthcare and Medicaid in general, right? Medicare, Medicaid.
Yeah.
And what the final product was different than the different iterations of it along the way, right?
Sure.
But how it ended up that I personally was protesting against it because, again, my coalition is nonpartisan and we are taking the position of what is in the best interest of individuals with disabilities.
Right.
There's no direct language in that big beautiful bill that directly impacts home and community-based services or waiver programs. But like I mentioned earlier, every single state gets to decide how they implement waivers or Medicaid dollars.
Okay.
Right?
I see, yeah.
So when you take federal legislation, and it kind of is that trickle-down effect like we talked about, when you take federal legislation, it's going to be interpreted and implemented in a vast variety of ways, depending on what state you live in, and then how your Medicaid and your state departments carry that out.
Right.
And so my biggest concern with the big beautiful bill is that there weren't specific protections in there for individuals with disability who needed Medicaid. That was one big thing I was asking for in meeting with those officials. And because I knew that once that bill was signed and sent to the states to implement, each state is going to say, okay, this is how we're going to cut costs, and these are the programs we're going to impact.
Right.
Home and community-based services, or DDD programs, they're called different things in different states, are not federally mandated, which is why there can be wait lists.
Sure.
And so oftentimes state legislatures will say, hey, this program's not mandated. We're going to kind of cut 10% off of it and you're going to have to deal with it.
Oh, I see.
And so my biggest concern is, how is our state going to implement these federal changes, even if it's not directly written in the bill? Right,
because it's vague, so it leaves it up to interpretation, which then it can be, removed or added or changed. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember where we left off, but I think Washington, D.C.
Yeah, D.C.
Yeah, so you're protesting at night, didn't bring a good jacket for the cold.
Yeah.
But did you were you just there to primarily protest? Did you end up working with some of the lawmakers and legislature? What else did you do there besides the protest?
Yeah, so I was there, representing a certain association, so I wanted to be respectful of their message. And
Sure.
I was mindful of that when I was talking with those individuals. I also learned a lot and got a lot of good contact information for, members of Congress from Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to connect with several of them on both sides of the aisle, which was amazing. And I think what I bring to the table that's kind of unique regarding the political activism space is that I want to work with both sides, because as we've seen over the last, several decades, is we kind of swing between which side's in power, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so I need to be able to have a conversation as a leader in that space and speak to whoever has that decision-making capacity at that time.
Right.
And those are the conversations we need to have. What speaks to them? What is their ethos? What is important to them? How can I craft my argument to be in alignment with that? And so that's not, everyone's approach, and that's totally fine. But when I've worked with state officials, that was what ultimately got through to both sides, is how are we having that conversation, regardless of what my opinion is.
Right.
Is I need to be able to work with both sides.
Sure. I guess that's probably a good approach, because I would assume a lot of lobbyists or people who are going in and talking to these lawmakers probably have, I don't want to make them sound bad, but probably have ulterior motives or have a variety of things they're trying to push versus yours is purely, I'm trying to help this specific group of people, and it doesn't matter whether you're Republican, you're Democrat, you're Libertarian, you're whatever it is.
Yeah.
I want to help this group. And so it would make sense that you're trying to work with a variety of belief systems and people and where they come from and their backgrounds to accomplish that goal. But
Yeah.
that's probably why it's been impactful thus far, because you're able to get in there and make results.
Yeah, I think, and, along the way, I told myself, I'm going to make mistakes. I've not done this before.
Yeah.
I don't have a, political, degree or anything of that nature. And I was okay with that because ultimately I had to come home to my child every day. I had to lay my head down at the end of the day and know that I tried my best for this population that needs this support.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to provide that advocacy, even if it wasn't perfect.
Totally.
And so what I've learned along the way, whether it's the politicians, the staff, people that we view and respect in positions of power, are people as well.
Right.
They have emotions, they have life experience, they have their own opinions, and ultimately we come down to we're both people talking to each other,
Right.
and we can have a conversation even if we disagree.
Yeah. That's a good outlook. I think we tend to be more divided than unified on things, and it's easy to see people by their, this or that, or their belief or their outlook on life. But it's like we're all people living on the same planet trying to figure it out, and we all have different backgrounds we come from, but that doesn't mean that we can find the commonalities. I think there's a lot more common than we have different from each other.
I agree with that.
So why nursing school? Because it sounds like you should be going into like policy making or law, but I would assume with the amount of caretaking you've done over the years too, there's probably you probably have an experienced background in a lot of things at this point that maybe a degree could be applied to.
Yes, yeah. I got into nursing school. My son, depending on the time, has hospital to ICU level care in the home setting. Depends on the day. He has a feeding tube. He has daily seizures. All that kind of stuff that we provide intervention for him at home, with the help of our care team. And I decided to go back to school partially because, I was allowed and capable of being in this paid role with my son, which was amazing, and I'm so grateful for. And they're mixed with, when we have providers or when they're not available. And I knew that my son is also on palliative care, meaning that he could pass away at any time due to his epilepsy condition. And, we've been through, a whole set of grieving with that experience as well. His epilepsy condition, he could pass tomorrow. He could live for another 30 years.
Wow.
We really don't know. And anyway, so with that in mind, I knew that I wanted to be able to provide him the best care possible, depending on how his condition evolves over time. And I also wanted to be able to financially contribute to my household if I was unable to be his provider on a short-term notice. Also keeping in mind that I have other children in the home, and that I've really formed a passion for working with families that are, in the palliative or hospice space with pediatric clients.
Okay.
Which is probably not most people's desired area of nursing or medicine, but I have been really affected by amazing palliative care teams at Phoenix Children's in particular, where we've been able to make really solid quality of life decisions for my son. And I've seen how much that's helped me as a caregiver, how much it's helped him. And I really want to be able to provide that type of care if or when that type of career arrives at my feet, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what our experience is, how it impacts, what we choose to do, or you have a positive, impactful experience somewhere, and you go, oh, I really like this path. If you don't mind me asking, because that is kind of unique, having, not knowing when your son might pass, or he could be alive for 30 years, like you said, or he could pass away tomorrow.
Yeah.
What's that like? What's that process like? You said, there's some grieving to that as well, trying to digest it. How have you and your family digested that, and what's that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all handle it differently.
Yeah.
But for myself, I know that a couple years ago we kind of went through this stage where he was declining, and we didn't know if he was going to kind of plateau again or if he was going to just keep declining.
Right.
And prior to that, he had just continued to make, little tiny micro improvements, for 5 or 6 years before this decline happened. And that decline was a really big wake up call of, let's live in the moment. Let's enjoy our kids. Let's, some people, get upset with their little 2-year-old when they color on the wall and they're, all these things of being two, and I find so much joy in that because I've, seen my other child not be able to have that developmental milestone.
Right.
And so it's made me live in the moment a lot more. It's made us say yes more often. One year my husband was like, we're doing Disneyland passes. And I was like, what? I'm pregnant. Are you kidding me? Anyway, and that was just such a fun year of, we're just going to go to Disney. We probably went, I don't know, 6 or 7 times within that annual period.
Oh, that's awesome.
And, we love Disney. That's one of our favorite places, particularly because it's so accessible.
Yeah.
But it's, maybe not the wisest financial choice in our early 30s, right?
Sure.
But now we have amazing memories.
Right.
Now we have those experiences with our son, and can live to the moment of we're doing the best and we're giving all of our children the life in the moment to the best of our ability, and enjoying that and not just, saying maybe I'll make it to this level, whatever I think that is one day.
Right. No, that makes sense. I think it's just a great perspective, to have. And there was a guy I was talking to. I don't think I've had him on the podcast. I need to, actually, now that I think about it. But he and his wife, because Jules and I just got married, right? And we were at church or whatever, and they started talking to us, and they told us, go. It was advice that their parents had given them, but they told them when they were younger, if you've got $1, go spend it on an adventure and make a memory.
Yeah.
And now I think he's on dialysis and stuff because he served in Vietnam and got exposed to Agent Orange, and so he's kind of got a lot of medical health issues now. So they're happy that they took those opportunities to make memories. And it's true. I think a lot of us live through life and don't live as much in the moment, and it's difficult. Life gets heavy and hard, but I think that's just a great perspective to have.
Yeah.
Towards.
Yeah, and it's been, and my husband and I have had our struggles, and
Sure.
We've had consequences of those choices too, and it's a learning and growing process along the way. And I think ultimately, like in my marriage, we've decided to continue to work with each other, and that our relationship with each other matters more than the issues or the problems around us.
Interesting.
And so
Yeah.
that's helped us become a really good care team for our son, for our other children, to show up for each other, to work through problems and know that we value our relationship more than the problem itself.
Yeah.
And that's really served us, and that's come through, individual therapy, marriage therapy, highly recommend. Yeah, it's been a really fun journey to be with him and not alone, because I think that's a rare experience, especially when you're raising a child with disabilities.
Sure. No, I think so. And when you say rare experience, having somebody with you, or is that what you mean by rare experience?
Yeah, rare experience as in a lot of marriages don't survive having children with disabilities. It can cause a wedge.
Sure.
There can be a lot of animosity if one parent is doing a lot of the care and the other one is kind of checked out,
right.
Or, different dynamics that play out. It can cause, extreme financial constraints, and just exasperate. Is that the right word?
Exacerbate.
Exacerbate. Thank you. Any other problems that you're kind of having in your relationship. So it's like, okay, are we going to actually address this and fix it? Or are we
Right.
just going to is it going to divide us further? So
Interesting.
it makes you kind of face things a little more head on, I think.
Right.
One way or the other.
That makes sense. I didn't realize that's it's very common for marriages to, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. Well, Brandi, this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you taking the time. You obviously have a packed schedule between everything you're doing and the impact you're making, obviously. And so I appreciate you coming on and telling me. Like I said, when Brittany told me a little bit about your background, and then obviously we talked a little bit at the bridal shower.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got us that awesome gift. We won't necessarily say what it was,
okay.
but
That's okay.
But yeah, it was. I was like, okay, we got to get her on and hear a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Do you want to plug a little bit about what you do, the website, where they can go find information,
sure.
and your podcast as well? Because I know that's
Yes. Yeah. We just launched our podcast, and again, we went into that. Myself and my vice president, Courtney.
Yeah.
We went into it and said, this is not going to be perfect, but we're going to get it going. So the podcast is called Say It Louder, and we cover a wide variety of issues related to disability, so in the education space, navigating services, some of our own personal stories, a few of which I shared here today. But it's a great place to, find that camaraderie and people to kind of learn more about what disability and caregiving is all about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then our coalition, you can find more information about that on raisingvoicescoalition.com. Okay. And we have memberships for self-advocates, so individuals with disabilities, caregivers, or allies, as well as provider agencies. And then we partner a lot with other disability organizations in the state and working on making sure that our message and what we're putting out is in alignment with, the broader impact and those other amazing organizations that are working in this space too.
Oh, very cool. Okay. And if someone joins like a membership, for example, a personal membership, what does that entail?
So that includes our learning library, where we have on-demand courses, and that we're adding 1 or 2 every single month. So those can be streamed any time of the day. And those are in different categories. And we have, leadership development. We have how do I advocate in the medical setting? How do I understand the ADA? How does that apply? Like, what do I do with that? What are IEPs? Individual education plans. And so if you're just starting out on the disability journey, it's a great resource. Or if you want to, work in the activism space and create systems change, there's also a lot of information there for you as well.
Wow.
So we have kind of a range of who we support, and then also on our website we have data that we've collected and the reports of that information. We also share our blog. Our podcast is on there, looking at what's at the top. Also our take action or our call to actions. So anytime there's a current issue, we'll push it up there so that people, whether they're just in the public, members of our community, can see, okay, I can send this email to these people and it'll make, a difference today.
Yeah.
So there's ways to get involved, whether it's on the paid side with the memberships or for community members who aren't there yet.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I love, like I said, I love what you guys are doing, what you stand for, and I'm excited to see where it keeps going and hear more about it. And I'm glad that I've gotten a chance to meet you a little bit. So thank you for taking the time.
Yes, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.